Having technical difficulties. All right, how's everybody doing today? Hotep. Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, and writer. So it is Friday, August 9th, 2019, and we are live. Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in. All right, so I want to talk about this story and make a few announcements for you all as well, because also you can start pre-ordering Hidden Colors 5 right now at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and when you place your pre-order, you'll get automatically 3 free digital downloads from myself, Michael Imhotep, of some of my latest presentations. But I saw this story from the Washington Post, and it deals with how this is from August 8th, 2019. So I posted this article on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, and it got a huge response. All right. And it's in one way, it is funny. In another way, it is sad. And this also deals with how Americans are woefully ignorant of history. You've heard me say this before. Americans are very ignorant of history. If we're ever going to get any type of reparations, America will have to have a massive history lesson. African Americans are ignorant of history. White people are ignorant of history. And it's on purpose, it's by design. Okay, so everybody share this broadcast, like the broadcast, share it on your Facebook fan page, share it on your Facebook page, invite your friends to tune in, okay? So this article from the Washington Post is entitled, "Some White People Don't Want to Hear About Slavery at Plantations Built by Slaves." Some white people don't want to hear about slavery at plantations built by slaves. Okay, and you have in various states that still have slave plantations, you will have tours that take place of the slave plantations, right? And these are educational tours. These are historic sites in many cases. You have the Monticello plantation that was owned by Thomas Jefferson. You have the Mount Vernon plantation that was owned by that's owned by George Washington. Okay, so these tours take place, and you see them in different states and cities across the country, especially southern states. All right, so this was a recent tour that took place, and you had people who took to Twitter to post their reviews of the tour that happened. And surprise, 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 you had the tour guides talking about slavery and the treatment of enslaved African people on the slave plantations that slaves built. So some of the responses were, it was just not what we expected. It was just not what we expected. I was depressed by the time I left. How do you think the slaves felt? I was depressed by the time I left. How do you think African Americans, many of us descendants of slaves, okay, how do you think we feel when we deal with this history? The tour was more of a scolding of the Old South. What do you think the Old South was? How do you think the Old South was built? How did you think the Old South got its wealth? The brief mentions of the former owners were defamatory. So did you think these were good Christians enslaving African people? Did you think these were good Christians forcing African people to work on the plantations? The brief mentions of the former owners were defamatory. They went on to say, would not recommend. Okay. So what happens is that People see movies like Gone with the Wind, and they think when they go see, some people think when they go to a slave plantation for a tour, this is going to be like Gone with the Wind. And they're going to see happy slaves and Mammy following around Scarlett O'Hara. And it's going to be wealth and opulence and things like this. So you had, the article goes on to say from the Washington Post, these are a few of the apparently negative reviews. These are a few of the apparently negative reviews posted online about guided tours of southern plantations, some of which went viral on Thursday, August 8th, 2019, after former Colorado congressional candidate Syra Rao, R-A-O, tweeted a screenshot of one of these reviews. Okay, so let me flip over here to the article here. And Syra said, this is how decent white people who tell the truth about slavery on plantations are reviewed by white people. So apparently some of the tour guides were white, and we'll see this, sometimes at these plantations. I haven't been to one yet, but I have been to Stone Mountain in Georgia. Okay. And if you all have been to Stone Mountain in Georgia, Google Stone Mountain. Even though it's not a slave plantation, it's in the vicinity, because Stone Mountain in Georgia is a huge mountain. And on the side of the mountain are the carvings of 3 Confederate quote unquote heroes. These were traitors to the Union who committed treason against the Union based upon Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution. In Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution defines treason. The 3 Confederate heroes that you have on the side of Stone Mountain. Stone Mountain is a huge mountain in Georgia. There are carvings on the side of the mountain of General Robert E. Lee, P.G.T. Beauregard, and Jefferson Davis. These were all 3 slave owners. All 3 fought on behalf of the South against the Union. They committed treason, took up arms against the South. And Jefferson Davis was from Mississippi. Robert E. Lee was from Virginia. Jefferson Davis was from Mississippi, and Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy. So that's in Georgia right now, Stone Mountain, Georgia. And you wonder why Stacey Abrams lost. Okay, part of it had to do not enough African Americans voting for her. I know there was rampant voter suppression. I know all that stuff, right? But still, the votes were there for black people to put her in office. Not enough of us came out and voted also, in spite of all of the opposition. So when you get to the top of Stone Mountain, because I've climbed to the top, you can climb up the side of the mountain, and there's a trail, and people use it to get in shape, to exercise, etc. So I went up all the way to the top of Stone Mountain. At the top of Stone Mountain, there is a souvenir shop at the top of Stone Mountain. And on all the souvenirs in that souvenir shop, on the mugs, on the glasses, on the keychains, on the hats, on the pennants, all that stuff are these carvings, these pictures of these Confederate heroes. That's right now in Georgia. It blew my mind when I saw that. I went in 2017. It blew my mind. Okay. So if you hear me talk about this, like this study here from the Southern Poverty Law Center, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. This is a 52-page study from the Southern Poverty Law Center. I downloaded it. Okay, I'll give you the link. You can download this. Okay, you can use this in teaching your children during the summertime or homeschooling your children. This study documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country, not just schools that have a predominantly African-American population. It documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country. And it gives numerous recommendations on how to more correctly teach the history of slavery, but it talks about the wide-ranging negative impact the long-term negative impact that comes from not properly teaching the history of slavery in schools all across this country. This impacts policing. This impacts laws put in place. This impacts how jurors on a jury see evidence. This impacts the teaching of our children and how teachers of different races perceive African-American children. This has a wide-ranging impact. And if we're ever going to get reparations, America needs a massive history lesson, because most Americans do not understand the history of slavery or the legacy of slavery. Okay, regardless of race, white people, African Americans, most of them don't understand this. All right, let's continue. Okay, African American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. And then also we'll post a link here to let you know about my new online course that starts up Thursday. Was it going to be Thursday, August 15th? Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is a 8-week, 16-hour online course where we deal with thousands of years of history, and we get deep into a lot of this history that I'm talking about right here. Last night, I taught a 8-week course that's wrapping up. And one of the things we got into last night is the fact that when the 20 Africans came into Jamestown, Virginia, August 20th, 1619, and we know later this month, you're going to have that commemoration of 400 years, August 20th, 1619, those 20 Africans come in on the White Line slave ship. At this time, slave laws don't exist in any of the 13 colonies. The first British colony to have slave laws, the British colonies here in this land, the first colony to have slave laws was Massachusetts in 1641. Slave laws don't even exist in the British colonies at that time in 1619. Those 20 Africans were put into indentured servitude. They're going to be released after about 3 to 5 years. Lerone Bennett Jr. breaks this down in chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower. But we don't understand history. So we don't know this, okay? Lerone Bennett Jr. breaks this down in chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr. Okay, so let's go back to this here. So Saira Rayo, S-A-I-R-A, who is a former Colorado congressional candidate, posted a screenshot of one of the reviews of this plantation tour. All right. And she said, this is how decent white people who tell the truth about slavery on plantations are reviewed by white people. And you have some white historians who tell the truth, like Edward Baptist, okay, who wrote the book, The Half That Has Never Been Told. And there was an article here, and what this book specifically deals with is how slave labor produced the cotton for this country, and how cotton was king, and how cotton created untold riches for America. And where's that article? There's an article dealing with that. I just had it. There's so many articles here. Here, I'll find it. I don't know where the hell it went. I just had the article. But Edward Baptist, The Half That Has Never Been Told. Okay. All right, I'll find it. I don't know where the hell that damn article went. I just had it. Okay, let's continue. She said, so she posted a review of a tour. This review says, my husband and I were extremely disappointed in this tour. We didn't come to hear a lecture on how white people treated slaves. We came to get this history of a Southern plantation and get a tour of the house and the grounds. Well, look, Blanche, what did you think was happening on this Southern plantation? What did you think was happening on this Southern plantation? The tour guide was so radical about slave treatment, we felt we were being lectured and bashed about the slavery. My ancestors were from Sicily, never owned slaves. Okay, now if your ancestors were from Sicily, you know the Moors are all up in Sicily. That's why Sicilians historically had a darker complexion. So you may have some African blood. You may have some Moorish ancestry. She said, my ancestors were from Sicily, never owned slaves, and my husbands were German, and none of his ever owned slaves. Okay, I am by far not a racist or against all Americans having equal rights, but this was my vacation, and now we are crossing all plantation tours off our list. It was just not what we expected. Well, what the hell did you expect? I'm trying to tell y'all. See, what we don't understand is that these are the people who are going to be calling their elected officials, telling them to vote no on reparations, because Americans are ignorant of history. She thought she was going to see Gone with the Wind. That's what she thought. Okay, because see, there's been a 150-year propaganda campaign called the Lost Cause. And the Lost Cause deals with refashioning the Civil War as a fight over states' rights, as opposed to a fight over slavery. And it's a 150-year campaign to position the Confederacy as the rebels, and they're so misunderstood. And the South shall rise again, and the Confederate battle flag of Northern Virginia that people call the Confederate flag, but it's not really the Confederate flag, because there were 3 flags that flew over the Confederate States of America from 1861 to 1865, and that flag was never one of them. Okay, so it's to refashion all of this stuff, because people don't understand history. So then when you try to get your issues met through policies, because slavery was public policy, slavery was legal. When you try to get your issues met through policies, then people tell you, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. It was your fault, because they don't understand how racism maldistributed scarce wealth, power, and resources in this country. And the 246-year institution of slavery was a tool that was used to maldistribute wealth, power, and resources in this country. Okay, so now I'm not sure why you chose to go to a slave plantation on your vacation, but okay, it's nice to have a vacation. Okay, hopefully I'll get one, one of these years. But I'm not sure why you chose to go to a slave plantation for your vacation, but okay. But what did you think you were going to see on the slave plantation? Did you think you were going to see Fiddler from Roots playing the fiddle? Did you think you were going to see happy slaves like Butterfly McQueen and Hattie McDaniels from Gone with the Wind? Now, the article goes on to lay out some historical facts about the transatlantic slave trade. According to the transatlantic slave trade database, which undercounts, many historians, African-centered historians, think that this really undercounts the numbers, but okay, they do have some type of documentation. Approximately 12.5 million human beings were kidnapped from their homes in Africa and shipped to the New World from 1514 to 1866. Now, we know that the Portuguese get involved in the transatlantic slave trade right about 1440. And then the Spanish are right behind them. 1514 is 3 years before the Asiento de Negros of 1517, signed by King Charles V, which gave the licenses, which are contracts between other countries to deliver enslaved Africans into the Spanish territories. The Spanish territories: Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, what will become Haiti, Honduras, Panama, things like this. These are territories that Columbus conquers in his 4 voyages, starting August 3rd, 1492, when he set sail on the Nina de Pinta and Santa Maria. Also, it's important to understand that the Spanish come to the territory we call Florida in 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon, okay, the Spanish conquistador. And they're taking African slaves into Florida, but also into the territory we call South Carolina. They're taking Africans into South Carolina in the 1520s. Okay, now this is before Jamestown, Virginia, August 20, 1619. This is roughly about 100 years before that. The Spanish were involved in the transatlantic slave trade before the English were involved. So when we talk about August 20th, 1619, all right, first of all, it's important for us to understand African people been in this land we call the United States of America going back at least 51,700 years. Okay, this was our land stolen from us. We were here before Native Americans even came into existence. We don't understand the chronology of history. So we deal with the last 400 years, but not the last 50,000 years. Okay, so read this book, get this book. It may still be available on Amazon Kindle. It's from my friend, Dr. David Imhotep. The first Americans were Africans, documented evidence. Okay, the first Americans were Africans, documented evidence. And this book thoroughly documents an African presence in this country going back at least 50,000 years. Okay. Okay, hold on. Just a second here. Okay, at least 50,000 years. Okay, but a lot of us don't understand this history. So when we deal with these historical issues, because African Americans have been stripped of our history and culture, okay, we automatically come to these issues at a deficit. We automatically come to these issues at a deficit. But according to historian Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., he talks about the transatlantic slave database, and they're looking at the period of time 1514 to 1866. Okay. All right. Okay, just a second. Somebody messaging me. Okay, hold on. I'll be done broadcasting in about 45 minutes. Okay, sorry about that, guys. All right, so this person goes on to say, the person who actually posted this review, the person who actually wrote the review, this bad review, they go on to say, would not recommend Thur. Thur was all about how hard it was for the slaves, end quote, wrote one reviewer of the Whitney Plantation in Louisiana. Okay, see, another movie that has distorted. Now, let me just explain something to you all. I've been studying media for 27 years. Okay, I've been studying the history of media, the impact that media has on the way people think. I've been studying that for 27 years. My degree is in business administration with a major in marketing. Because of my background in marketing, and because I was studying African history, African American history in college, all those things intersected. So then I started studying the origins of the negative stereotypical images of African Americans, going back to slavery, and then seeing how these images still exist today, and how they're and how these images are shown in the media. Okay. And these images are, these negative stereotypical images of African Americans are exported around the world. This is what we don't understand. These negative stereotypical images of African Americans are exported around the world in negative corporate control hip hop, in movies that depict us negatively, etc. So people around the world see these images, even if they don't know any African Americans personally. They see these negative stereotypical images of African Americans as being criminals, drug dealers, drug addicts, abusing alcohol, hypersexualized, half naked in hip hop videos, cursing, talking about promiscuity, things like this, and they develop a consensus. This is what happens. So then when they come in contact with someone who they have been fed negative stereotypical images about, they oftentimes, not every time, but they can oftentimes react to that person based upon the way they've been programmed to react. It's the same way you may react if you see a snake on the ground and you never held a snake or never been bitten by a snake before. But because of the imagery and what you've been taught about snakes, you see a snake and run. And it could be a garter snake that's harmless. But you'll see a garter snake and act like it's a python that's gonna crush you to death. Okay? See, and what white supremacy does, what a system of white supremacy does, is it pits groups of oppressed people against each other. It pits groups of oppressed people against each other to keep people fighting one another, so they can keep exploiting people. All right, and this is how the 1% or the 10% stays in power. This is what we have to understand. All right, so how's everybody doing? Rhonda, let's see, Rhonda, and usually I broadcast in okay, I see Rhonda. Who else we have? Ramona. Who else? Sandra, Kevin. Okay, we'll come back here. Ernest, Anika, just a few of the people watching. All right. So the article from the Washington Post goes on to say slaves who lived on plantations typically worked 10 to 6 hours a day. So they're given, in this article, they're given like some historical background information because everybody doesn't know this. Slaves who lived on plantations typically worked 10 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, according to the University of Houston's Digital History. Children as young as 3 were put to work. Okay, children as young as 3 were put to work. Now you will have this. Yeah, that did happen. The age that children are put to work could vary based upon the size of the plantation, how many slaves are on the plantation, and then also what you'll have depending upon the size of the plantation and the age of the some of the enslaved Africans on the plantation. Well, a lot of times on larger plantations, the slaves that were too old to work in the fields would oftentimes watch the children who were too young to work in the fields. Okay. And the other thing that's important to understand is that there were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. There were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. So, oh, here's that article. Okay, I'll give you that. The half has never been told. I have all these articles. So these were all skills, trades, and crafts that slave owners exploited to enrich themselves and build this country. Okay, I mean, we were bricklayers, we were brick masons, we were carpenters, blacksmiths, coppersmiths, all different types of skills. And then after slavery ends in 1865, you're going to have a lot, and then now we can compete for wages. Then you're going to have a lot of these labor unions that are going to be created, like the National Labor Union created in 1866. Okay, the National Labor Union created in 1866. And what's going to happen is that you're going to have these large labor unions created to protect jobs for white men and lock African Americans out of these jobs that we have been doing for free for 246 years. There was if you read the book, How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy, from the Nation of Islam Research Group, they break down some of this history in here. But also there is the article from, there's a book called The Other Slaves that came out in 1978, The Other Slaves. And I thought I had the information on that. The Other Slaves. And I found out about this book at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. When you go through their exhibit called And Still We Rise, and it deals with the history of African Americans in this country, and it deals with slavery, things like this. You go through a replica of a slave ship, okay, and then when you come out on the other side, they show Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and different things like this. But there's a display on the wall, and the display shows all these skills, trades, and crafts that we had in this country from 1619 to 1865, and it comes from this book. So there's a sign on the wall. There's a sign on this, not an easel, but it's a display on the wall. There's a sign there that says you can't take pictures. So I went home, got a pen and a pad, and I came back and I spent an hour writing them down, and I numbered them. That's how I know it's 262, because they weren't numbered. So when you have people who say things like, well, my ancestors didn't own slaves, so my tax dollars shouldn't have to go towards any type of reparations compensation. Not saying reparations should be only in the form of money, because it shouldn't, because we all got $1 million today. White people have it all back this time next week, and you would not have brought about the structural changes that are needed. But they don't make these same they didn't make the same argument like back in 2009, 2010, when you had the stimulus package and $200 million, almost $200 million was paid in reparations to Filipino Americans through the stimulus package. They didn't make that same argument then. Go research that. That had to do with World War II. Okay, Filipino Americans received almost $200 million and reparations in the stimulus package. Okay, they don't make those type of arguments when you still have Confederate soldiers, who the descendants of Confederate soldiers, who still get pensions today from the Civil War. They don't make those arguments then. Okay, so you had another person who visited the McLeod plantation in Charleston, South Carolina. This person said on Twitter, this review said, quote, "I was depressed by the time I left and questioned why anyone would want to live in South Carolina. I was depressed by the time I left and questioned why anyone would want to live in South Carolina." Okay. Read one review posted to Twitter about the McLeod plantation in Charleston. All right. Now in 1860, 402,406 people were living in South Carolina, not because they wanted to, but because they were enslaved. They made up 57% of the state's population, according to census data. All right. So 1860 is the year before the Civil War starts. South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union, December 20th, 1860. This is about 6 weeks after Abraham Lincoln becomes the president-elect of the Republican Party to be president. This was in November of 1860. And the Civil War is going to start the following year, April 12th, 1861. So on the verge of the Civil War, there were 402,406 people living in South Carolina, not because they wanted to, but because they were enslaved. They made up 57% of the state's population, according to census data. Now, we know that the U.S. Census, right, was created by the Constitution. So Constitution signed 1787, ratified in 1788. The first census was taken in 1790. And the census is designed to count every person in the U.S., whether they are a citizen or not. Okay, it doesn't say every citizen in the U.S., it's to count every person in the U.S. So when Trump wants to put a citizenship question on the U.S. Census, a lot of people don't understand what this is about. This is about the fear of the browning of America. And what he's trying to do is drive down the recorded population in certain Democratic leaning states. Because if you put the citizenship question on the census, then some people who you have a lot of households where you have quote unquote legal immigrants there and undocumented immigrants living there. Okay. About 60% of undocumented immigrants came here legally but overstayed their visas. This is something that Trump doesn't want to tell you. See, a lot of them came here legally, overstayed their visas. If they overstay their visa, they become undocumented. He wants you to think that all undocumented immigrants are Hispanics who ran across the Mexican border and came across illegally. No, that's not it. A lot of undocumented immigrants, regardless of race or ethnicity, came here legally, overstayed visas, but that's another conversation. But what happens is you can have people who some are undocumented, some are here legally in the same household, okay? Because the children that are born here are legal. But even beyond that, you can have adults, some who are here legally, some here undocumented, living in the same household. So if you have a situation where you had a citizenship question on the census, it can scare even some immigrants who are here legally in the same household with an immigrant that's here undocumented, and they don't respond at all. Nobody responds to the census. What happens is that drives down the recorded census count in Democratic leaning states. What impact does this have? Number one, federal funding is associated with population growth and population declines. When you have a decline in population, you get less funding in general from the federal government. If you have an increase in population, you get more funding from the federal government. About more than 10 years ago now, when Detroit, I think it was more than 10 years ago, when Detroit, our population in Detroit dropped below 1 million, we lost a lot of federal funding from the government. Okay, this impacts African Americans. So not only does that census question and driving down population impact funding, okay, for states and cities that have an increase in population can oftentimes get more funding, and they get less funding when they have a decrease in population. The other thing is that this impacts congressional representation in the House of Representatives. What determines how many seats in the House of Representatives a particular state has is based upon the population of the state. When you have increases in population, it can cause new districts to be drawn, and the districts are drawn by the state legislature. The districts are redrawn every 10 years based upon the census report, based upon the census and the report dealing with population. So you can have, if you have increases of population in cities, you can have new congressional districts drawn, which increases the number of members in the House of Representatives cities have, states have, okay, which gives them more representatives fighting for their issues and their concerns. If you have a decrease in population, you can lose congressional representation. So when the city of Detroit, when we went below 1 million, we lost congressional representation. We lost one U.S. House of Representatives seat. The other thing that this impacts, if you lose congressional representation, then what else do you lose? You lose votes in the Electoral College that are associated with your state. And this is what a lot of people don't know. What determines how many Electoral College votes that your state has? You take the number of U.S. senators that a state has. Every state has 2 based upon the U.S. Constitution. You add to that the number of members in the House of Representatives a state has. So Michigan has 16, California has 55, Vermont and Maine have 3. If you drive down population, you can lose U.S. House of Representatives seats, which then means you have less votes, less Electoral College votes associated with your state, which means you weaken Democratic leaning states when it comes to presidential elections and getting to 270 Electoral College votes. So even though you can actually have an overall decline in population in Republican states, if it's not recorded like that, and you focus on driving down population in Democratic leaning states, then Republicans can manipulate the electoral college and continue to win elections in the electoral college, even though they may lose the popular vote. That's what this is about. But we don't understand none of this. That's what that one question on the census that I think it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's one of the higher courts. Things went to the U.S. Supreme Court. They ruled that it's unconstitutional to put it on the census because it hasn't been on the census in something like 70 years. Okay, there's no need for it to be on the census. And they in the Trump administration changed their argument about 10 times why they wanted it on the census. First, they said it's to enforce the Voting Rights Act of 1965. You don't need that to enforce the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But that's what all this is about. They're trying to change the balance of power. Okay, and Republicans know they have a declining number of Republicans. So they're focusing on still being able to win presidential elections, even though they get less popular votes. Trump can win. There was an article from NBCnews.com a couple weeks ago that talked about how Trump in 2020 could get 5 million fewer popular votes and still win in the electoral college, because we don't understand how the electoral college works. That's why we have to read the U.S. Constitution, because the U.S. Constitution created the electoral college. So all this history is interrelated, interconnected. All right, so this person who went to the McLeod plantation in Charleston, South Carolina. How's everybody doing? Tangela, let's see here. I can't see everybody. Usually broadcast and crowdcast, so the stuff is a little different. Skilo, Sandra, how's everybody doing? Okay. How y'all like this type of information? If you like this type of information, a couple of things. One, you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. Two, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, that helps us stay on the air, keep doing the research, do our Sunday night show. We should be on live this Sunday on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF in Detroit. Two, we have my online course. We have a new section of it starting up Thursday, August 15th, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, and this is an 8-week, 16-hour online course. And we deal with thousands of years of history. Okay, so we have that as well. We'll post a link here, register here. As soon as you register, there's about 36 hours of bonus content you can watch. And we do the course live on Thursdays, 8 p.m. And then they're archived. You can go back and watch it over and over again, watch from around the world. Okay, so we're going to deal with thousands of years of history. We'll deal with archaeological discoveries. We'll deal with what led to the transatlantic slave trade happening and get a better understanding of it. Okay. Then also, you can pre-order Hidden Colors 5 at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It officially releases Monday, August 12th. And for each copy you purchase, you get 3 of my digital downloads free with it automatically. Okay. So we'll post a link here as well. All right, let me see. So this thing doesn't automatically scroll, so I can keep up with comments. Terry, Kimberly, Tracy. Okay, how y'all doing? All right, so let's continue here. Okay, so this person who went to the McLeod plantation in South Carolina said, I felt the African-American tour guide embellished her presentation and was racist towards me, a white person, end quote. Okay, this is another person who visited the McLeod plantation. Racist toward you, how? 1, 2, black people cannot be racist. African Americans cannot be racist. See, the whole term racist is being like thrown around, and people are confusing racism with bigotry. But if she's explaining history, how is that racist or bigoted? So racism is a system. So we understand what racism is. Racism is a power structure. Racism has nothing to do with not liking people, calling people racial epithets, calling people names, hating people. That's not racism. That's bigotry. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy. This is what racism is. Racism occurs when one race of people control the majority of the wealth, power, resources, privileges, benefits, land, access to education, access to opportunity, and they use this to marginalize, subordinate, and do harm to another race of people. If you read Black Labor, White Wealth by Dr. Claude Anderson, he talks about this in there. If you read Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy, she deals with some of this, some aspects of this as well. You can read The Destruction of Black Civilization by Dr. Chancellor Williams. You can read How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. So all this is very well documented. Okay, we don't understand what racism is because we don't understand history. It's not that the history books have not been written, it's that we haven't read them. It's not that the history books have not been written, it's that we haven't read them. And we don't understand. And also, this history is not properly taught in schools. This is why the study from the Southern Poverty Law Center, Teaching Hard History of American Slavery, this is why this is so important, okay? Teaching Hard History of American Slavery from the Southern Poverty Law Center. This is why this is so important, all right? And I just posted the link here, splcenter.org. You could download that. Okay, so in 1993, historian Clarence J. Munford estimated the value of the labor performed by Black slaves in the United States between 1619 and 1865, compounded with 6% interest, to be $97 trillion in today's dollars, without 97 trillion. And then in today's dollars, without further compound interest added, that would be 172 trillion. Okay. I'm all for reparations. That ain't happening. I'm telling you right now, that's not happening. The annual federal budget is about $4.7 trillion. A new one about 4.9 trillion. The new annual federal budget. And then the other thing is, I talked about in the online course in class number 7. We don't understand how to make legal arguments. How hard we worked and how much we generated and all that stuff. Those are not legal arguments. Because, I asked this question to people and they seem shocked by the question. When you study the history of slavery in this country, where did you read that slaves were supposed to be paid? I'm not saying it was right, it was legal. When you study the history of slavery in this country, where did you read that slaves were supposed to be paid? The whole purpose was to enslave you and not pay you to increase the wealth. I'm not saying it was right or moral, but it was legal. So how do you go to lawmakers and argue we work for free and you owe us 27 trillion, 30 trillion, 97 trillion, 172 trillion dollars? See, those are not legal arguments. All right. So when we look at the Amistad case of 1839, Amistad slave ship, those Africans, Joseph Q and the others, that case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. They won their freedom in the U.S. Supreme Court because when that ship came into the U.S., it violated federal law because March 2nd of 1807, the U.S. Congress passed a law that outlawed the transatlantic slave trade, the international slave trade. That was March 2nd, 1807. That went into effect January 1st, 1808. But why was that law written? The law was written because it was stipulated in Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution that the earliest that the transatlantic slave trade could be abolished was 1808. But we haven't read the Constitution, so we don't know this. Go to loc.gov, which is the Library of Congress website, loc.gov, or go to archives.gov, and you can read the you can read the U.S. Constitution there. Article 1, Section 9 lays the foundation for that law being written and passing Congress, and then the earliest it could go into effect was January 1st, 1808. Okay. So because at the Philadelphia Convention, where the Constitution is being debated, spring of 1807, by 1787, I'm sorry, the spring of 1787. By 1787, 5 states had already abolished slavery. 5 states had already abolished slavery by the time that the Constitution is signed. So, and you have, Vermont was the first state to abolish slavery. You're going to have Vermont in 1777. You have Massachusetts, 1783. You're going to have New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut. They had already abolished slavery by 1787. But we don't understand this history. So read the article from history.com, March 2nd, 1807, Congress abolishes the African slave trade. Okay, March 2nd, 1807, Congress abolishes the African slave trade. So the African slave trade deals with the Africans being brought into this country as slaves. All right. Now, slavery was inside of the U.S., the auctioning off of African slaves, the enslavement of Africans on plantations, things like that, that was still legal in states that still had slavery, because some states had already abolished slavery by then. But a lot of people don't know that the international slave trade was abolished. Okay, so all those Africans who were smuggled into the country from 1808 to 1860, when the last known slave ship comes in, the Clotilda, June of 1860 in Alabama. All of that was illegal. All illegal, and those in the U.S. are violating federal law. All right, let's continue here. And then also check out the article from Dr. Jahi Issa and Brother Reggie Marbury for Black Agenda Report. We talked about it in the class. This deals with reparations is dead, and it talks about how to revive it. And it deals with this history of the international slave trade being abolished in 1808, and those in the U.S. still violating federal law. All right, because see, when you study the Amistad case, when that ship came in, it was illegal. Those Africans won their freedom in the U.S. Supreme Court, and they were sent back to Africa. But we don't understand how to make legal arguments. So this is part of the problem. Okay, hold on. Is this article coming up? But just Google that, reparations is dead. Here's how to resurrect it. Okay, Black Agenda Report. I'm trying to pull up the article. We'll post a link later. Okay, let's continue with this. All right, so it goes on to this article goes on to say, our guide Olivia offered a heavy bias with only the hand-picked facts that neatly fit her narrative, and for a large part were not germane to a plantation tour, end quote, one person said of the McLeod plantation, according to a review posted to Twitter before following up with the racist comment, quote unquote, racist comment, quote, I found it amusing when she told us some freed slaves fled to northern cities like Baltimore and Detroit, where they continue to thrive to this day, end quote. So is she saying that the former slaves are still alive today in Baltimore and Detroit? I mean, I don't understand what she's saying. It doesn't make any sense. But See, if you look at what she said, our guide Olivia offered a heavy bias with only the hand-picked facts that neatly fit her narrative for a large part weren't germane to a plantation tour. How many plantation tours have you been on? What facts, what other facts did you want her to include? See, a lot of people have, there were some blockbuster movies that largely helped to shape the way people view slavery. Okay, I don't know if this person's ever seen Roots, the original Roots, but some of those movies were Gone with the Wind, came out in 1939. The Birth of a Nation, the original Birth of a Nation, debuted February 8th, 1915. Because in that movie, it depicted happy slaves on a plantation in South Carolina. It depicted happy slaves. Okay, and then you have that, and then also you have Uncle Tom's Cabin, which came out around about a 30-minute movie. Came out around 1912, and it depicted a subservient, docile, obedient slave who was Uncle Tom. Okay, but we know the real Uncle Tom was based upon a runaway slave who became an abolitionist. His name was Josiah Henson. And he and his family ran away from a plantation in Maryland, and they go up north and go into Canada. And he becomes a Methodist minister and an educator, and he works with the Underground Railroad to free other enslaved Africans. So on an episode of The Jeffersons, they talk about this when Louise's cousin comes to visit, and he's a butler. He was the same actor who played Alderman Davis on Good Times. And he schooled George and Lionel, the original Lionel, who was Mike Evans. And Mike Evans, the original Lionel, was also the co-creator of the TV show Good Times. It was Eric Monty and Mike Evans who created the TV show Good Times. So in each episode of Good Times, you see their names in the credit, Mike Evans. And so when Good Times takes off, because Good Times was a spinoff of All in the Family. Okay. And well, let me back up. Good Times was a spinoff of Maude. Florida Evans was Maude's maid. The Jeffersons was a spinoff of All in the Family. Maude was a spinoff of All in the Family. Florida Evans was Maude's maid, played by Esther Rolle. And her show, that's Good Times, spun off of Maude. Okay. So when Good Times starts, Mike Evans leaves the Jeffersons and he goes to work on Good Times as a writer. Okay. And he's the co-creator of the show. And then they bring in Damon Evans, the other actor, to play the second Lionel. Then when Good Times ends around 78, 79, Mike Evans goes back to the Jeffersons. All right. I studied the history of TV shows too. But so what you are looking at is we're seeing these stereotypes perpetuated, and they shape the way people perceive reality. Okay. So a lot of people look at slavery who haven't studied the history of slavery. They look at it, they have images of the happy slaves singing and dancing for their masters, and the masters looking at the slaves almost as part of the family, because this is what was depicted in the movie The Birth of a Nation. Came out February 8th, 1915. Towards the beginning of the movie, because the movie deals with slavery, Reconstruction, slavery, the Civil War, and Reconstruction. All right. Now, the article goes on to say as many as 100,000 people escaped slavery on the Underground Railroad, according to historian James A. Banks. Yeah, so you'll see different estimates of how many escaped on the Underground Railroad. The main one we know of comes into existence about 1831, toward the end of slavery. Okay. And you'll see estimates of about 100,000. I've seen lower estimates as well. Okay. Quote, there is really nothing good you can say about slavery, but I felt the tour guide took it too far. His information is correct, but I think he left off part of the story, end quote, one reviewer said. Okay. Now, what part of the story did he leave off? When you go read this, and we'll post a link to this article. When you go read this, the part of the history that people say they think the tour guide left off, they don't say what that part of the history was. They don't say what the part of the history was. They don't say they don't talk about in general what part of the history was. They don't say how that left out part of history impacts our overall understanding of slavery. They don't give any books to read, any references that they're citing for this left out history of slavery that they're saying the tour guide left out. And then my question is, well, if the tour guide left this information out, did you ask the tour guide about this information? Because you ain't talk about it here. Or maybe they just dealt with history that you didn't like. Maybe they just dealt with history that you didn't like, and it caused you to rethink the real history of America and the legacy of slavery in this country. So this month, the article goes on to say, this month, Virginia will commemorate the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in 1619. We can say in the British colonies, because the Spanish colonies, the Africans were already here. And there were free Africans already here as well. This was our land stolen from us. We had been here for tens of thousands of years. Okay. So this month, Virginia will commemorate the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in 1619, according to their count, which ushered in 246 years of brutal subjugation for millions of men, women, and children. One of those slaves was named Angela. Now, another review said, quote, if you're looking to visit a traditional plantation, look elsewhere, end quote. What is your concept of a traditional plantation? What is your concept? You're talking about slave plantations. What's your concept of a traditional slave plantation? What did you think went on slave plantations? Many plantations, including George Washington's Mount Vernon and Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, are working to present a more accurate image of what life was like for slaves and slave owners. For those who may prefer a fuzzier, less accurate portrayal of plantation life, Gone with the Wind is streaming on Amazon and iTunes for $3.99, a low price, but still higher than the average slave's wage, which was $0. Okay. So this was written by Gillian Brockell, Brockell, Gillian Brockell, from the Washington Post. Now, this is not hate speech. We're not attacking people, things like this. We're dealing with history. This is an article. These were reviews of slave plantations that, people toured. So this is not hate speech or anything like that. We're dealing with history. It's not my fault they made dumbass comments. Once again, name of this article from the Washington Post. Some white people don't want to hear about slavery at plantations built by slaves. Some white people don't want to hear about slavery at plantations built by slaves. Okay. So check this out. We posted the link for this article here on the thread of the broadcast as well. Okay, yeah, we posted that link there. Let's see here. Okay, I gave you some of these other articles. Read the one. Oh, check out this also, this other one. New York Times, October 3rd, 2014. This is written by historian Eric Foner, who's a white historian, but he does a lot of good work. This is about Edward Baptist's book, The Half Has Never Been Told. The Half Has Never Been Told, okay? And this deals with the role that slaves played in the production of cotton in this country and the untold wealth that cotton generated in this country. There was an article from AtlantaBlackStar.com from AtlantaBlackStar.com from a few years ago. December 17, 2014, 9 facts proving slavery was responsible for American and European economic success. One of the mistakes that people make, and this is why when we talk about reparations, repairing the damage and reparations for slavery, the mistake that we make is just talking about the history of slavery as opposed to the legacy of slavery. Legacy of slavery deals with Reconstruction. It deals with the redistribution of land, the Homestead Act of 1862 that redistributed about 250 million acres of land, and they redistributed land for over 100 years, going up to 1988. And African Americans are largely locked out of this land redistribution. And you have some white families that still have this land today. It's been handed down from generation to generation. You have the Southern Homestead Act of 1866 that redistributed 45 million acres of land. You have the Dawes Allotment Act of 1887 that redistributed about 138 million acres of land. And we're largely shut out of the majority of this land redistribution after we worked the land for free for 246 years. You have Reconstruction. You have Jim Crow era. You go into we look at the policies coming from the federal government, like with the New Deal policies, like the GI Bill in 1944, the Homeowners Loan Corporation created in 1933 that creates the whole redlining system, and the Federal Housing Administration in 1934. The GI Bill we see is really going to exacerbate the racial wealth gap in this country. And it's going to give low interest loans for white World War II veterans to go to college, start businesses, and buy homes. And African American veterans are largely going to be locked out of this. Okay, and it's totally going to change the landscape of higher education in this country. So we see the GI Bill. We see the fund $67 billion being invested in the GI Bill from 1946, 47 to 1970. Okay, I did a broadcast dealing with how the GI Bill discriminated against African American World War II veterans. So you can check that out on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP on YouTube, or our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network also. Okay. All right, let me see here. Okay, African American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. All right. Do you know what income shifting is? Okay, visit workingwithjohnray.com, workingwithjohnray.com on more information dealing with income shifting. Now, income shifting takes your money back from those who are taking it from you, and that's thousands of dollars a year. That could be thousands of dollars a year. Income shifting is a group of financial strategies that help to take John Ray from living from paycheck to paycheck to investing and not focusing on what the next check or on where the next check is coming from. Visit workingwithjohnray.com, workingwithjohnray.com for more information. Okay, email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. African American business owners, we'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Current promotion, get 2 months for the price of one. And we know that it's summertime, people are trying to get back in shape. The Fast Life 28-Day Challenge can help you. Visit TFL28.com, TFL28.com. This is a 4-week, 28-day challenge that is an online coaching program that helps members tap into their body's natural ability to repair itself via fasting. Repair yourself via fasting. In this challenge, they focus on utilizing fasting, whole foods, and movement to improve metabolic conditions such as obesity, high blood pressure, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, and more. Visit their website, tfl28.com. And they also have in this program, you will be helped by 3 health coaches to help you along to get the optimum results. All right, let's see who we have here. Anika said, I got rid of my TV for a year because of that. Okay, I think you're talking about the stereotypical images. And then got a TV, but never cable to control what me and my family were viewing. All right. If we look quickly here at this article, 9 facts proving slavery was responsible for American and European economic success. This is from AtlantaBlackStar.com, December 2014, written by Curtis Bunn, B-U-N-N. It talks about according to the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History, cotton provided over half of all U.S. export earnings. Cotton provided over half of all U.S. export earnings. By 1840, the South grew 60% of the world's cotton and provided some 70% of the cotton used by the British textile industry. Thus, according to the Institute, slavery paid for a substantial share of the capital, iron, and manufactured goods that laid the basis for American economic growth. All right. Then also we have to understand that enslaved Africans were used as collateral. So wealthy slave owners could get loans from banks. Okay. And then you're going to have about 40 insurance companies that are going to take out insurance policies, not just on slaves on the plant, on the ships, but also slaves on the plantation. One of them was the Nautilus Mutual Life Insurance Company, founded in the spring of 1845 in Manhattan. And then they're going to change their name to the New York Life Insurance Company. There's a big article in the New York Times dealing with that. Okay, so check out this article also. All right, everybody, look, I have to get out of here. Remember at the African History Network. So you can donate to the African History Network if you like this type of information. PayPal.me/the AHN show. PayPal.me/the AHN show. Or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button right on the homepage. And this helps us to keep doing the research, stay on the air, broadcast, pay the bills, do our Sunday night show. Should be on live this Sunday night. They're running Major League Baseball on 9:10 a.m. Superstation WFDF. So my show is supposed to be 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. It cuts into my show. So we'll see if it ends at about 10:15, something like that. So I'm going to try to broadcast live this Sunday, and we'll also broadcast on Facebook Live. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All of my DVD lectures are there. We have a new bundle pack, as well as Black Migrations bundle pack. These are 6 of my latest presentations. Okay. And then when you pre-order Hidden Colors 5, you'll get 3 of my latest digital downloads also. Okay. All right. People sending me messages here. What the hell is this? Okay. So we'll post that link also for it's a 6 DVD Black Migrations bundle pack. And these are all presentations I've done this year. It includes 6 principles of political self-defense. God damn it. It includes 6 principles of political self-defense. And then it also includes about a 3-hour presentation I did dealing with how the history of why African Americans switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party, because most of us really don't understand that history. A lot of us think it was because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. No, that's not true, because by 1960, about 2/3 of African Americans had already switched over to the Democratic Party, and this goes back to the Lily White movement in 1928, and the Republicans, an effort from the Republicans to push African Americans out of the Republican Party, and also what was going on at that time in the 1920s. That's what that dealt with. It wasn't because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. All right. So we posted the link here to the 6 DVD bundle pack, the Black Migrations bundle pack, and that's also available at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's on sale right now, $50. And this also ties into the year of return, 1619 to 2019. And we know that many African Americans are going back to Africa this year to visit and reconnect to African ancestry and African culture. All right, so look, hey, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now, knowledge corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Remember, right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.